Hey everybody, Claire Culwell here. Thank you so much for joining me for my brand new mini series for this week, for the next few days leading up to the 2020 election, called What Matters at the Polls. I'm going to sit down with individuals just like you and I who are going to talk to me about what issues they're looking at when it comes to how they will vote, what matters to them at the polls, and why they will be voting according to their values and what that looks like for them. And so I hope you will be encouraged. I hope that this will start a conversation for you as you yourself go to the polls and vote for the things that matter to you in the 2020 election. I hope you enjoy. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today, I am so excited to be joined by Mario Herrera. He is a political activist for Hispanic outreach, and he is going to tell us what he's hearing about at the polls, what matters to him when he's headed to the polls. I'm really looking forward to this because the voices of minorities, the voices of people like you and I, they need to be heard and they need to be taken into consideration. So Mario, thank you so much for joining us. It's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you as well, and thank you for having me. So my primary focus has been for the past couple of years, the Hispanic community. What I'm hearing from the ground and almost every place that I go to is that the vast majority of Hispanics, they vote Democrat, but they believe in conservative values. And growing up in a traditional Mexican household, we grew up with strong family values. We grew up with a strong work ethic, and we grew up, with not wanting to take any handouts from anyone. If you look at the value system in the Hispanic community, it's a copy and paste value system of the Republican Party. But for decades, Democrats have told Hispanics that you need to vote a certain way because even though you have the same values as that party, they don't like you because of the color of your skin. So what they've done is they've used victimization as a way to control minorities, because if they could convince you that you're a victim, they own you. And one of the biggest things that scares the left, in regards to minority outreach, is they understand that they're losing a base that they've relied on for so long. Right now, President Trump actually received more of the Hispanic vote than Mitt Romney did when he ran for president, or than John McCain when he ran for president. And I remember when I started looking at the numbers, I started looking at Democrat communities that are primarily Hispanic, and I noticed that even though they vote so Democrat, they all voted for President Trump. And then if you walk the downtown areas, you start noticing that all of the businesses are Hispanic owned. So to me, this president has been a reflection of the American dream that so many Democrats have said has gone away.
Wow, that's really interesting. Tell me, what got you to where you are today as a political activist for specifically the Hispanic community? What do you do in regards to that? What got you there? What motivated you to really start caring about what is happening in politics and use your platform to further, my guess is going to be your support for President Trump?
So I'll actually, we started this conversation before the podcast started, and I told you that I haven't used Skype since I was in Iraq about, 13 years ago. And that was actually when I first started developing my, I don't want to say developing my political identity, because I already had one just through my upbringing. But I started paying attention at a lot of the things that were going on overseas. We're in Iraq, and most of us have no idea why. So you start paying attention politically, and then you start looking at the value systems of the different political parties. And then I started realizing, oh, I'm a Republican. I had no idea what a Republican even was at the time. And so I started paying attention as I was getting out of the Marine Corps. One of the state legislators out in California actually, he offered me a job because I started getting civically engaged, and I started working for the state legislature in California. In 2015, I was the only one out of all of my friends that was publicly supporting President Trump, or then candidate Trump. And my biggest reason was we went to, I remember we went to an event in San Diego, and it was for Ted Cruz. And I liked Senator Cruz, but he wasn't my guy. But Senator Cruz at the time wanted the endorsement of every Republican legislator, which he nearly got almost every endorsement. And then I remember one of the congressmen who was also a Marine gives me a call and he goes, "Hey, Trump's going to be in San Diego for a rally. He wants to get together with all the veterans. Do you want to come?" I'm like, "Absolutely." So I go, and I remember at the Cruz event, every person that was there was almost every political operative that gets to swing the way that politics runs in Republican circles in California. They all hated Trump at the time. But then you go to San Diego, where there's 30,000 people there, and I don't know a single person there, and it kind of gives you a reminder of why I got involved in the first place. And the contrast to me was, political establishment versus the American people.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love hearing just people's stories of how they got to where they did. And so thank you, first of all, for your service to our country. I want to hear, like, as you're talking to people in your community, specifically Hispanic voters, what are they saying? What matters to the Hispanic community? Why are they voting the way they're voting? As you mentioned, it's predominantly a Democratic vote for Hispanic voters. Why do certain issues matter to them, and why do you think certain issues should matter to them, maybe in a way that they're not recognizing or not taking to the polls? Does that make sense?
It does. So if you look at most public polls, when you poll the Hispanic community and ask them what's important to them, you're going to find number one is always public safety. It's actually the economy, and then number two is always public safety and education. So it always switch back and forth between 2 and 3. In most polls, immigration doesn't even enter their polling until about until number 5 or 6. But so if you look at the things that are important to Hispanics, it's education, it's the economy, it's their own public safety, their families. The same thing that's important to everybody else. But whenever I'm asked a question about, and you're actually one of the few that's asked me, "Hey, what's important to you guys?" Most people ask me, "Well, what do you think about immigration?" And I'm like, you do know that we're not single issue voters. Most people will immediately target us as one single issue voters, and they will speak to us like we all came here illegally, which we didn't. So when you look at the issues, they're the same. They're the same with the Hispanic community as they are with anyone else. Mm-hmm. If you look at at the questioning, I'm rarely asked anything other than immigration, and my response is always that you have this concept that national security is important to everyone except for Hispanics when our families want to be safe too. What you never hear is the problems that actually take place at the border that most people that came here illegally in the past understand, because it's not like it was 50 years ago where you would pay a coyote, which President Trump mentioned during the debate last week, and the Twitter storm was pictures of Wile E. Coyote because no one understood what a coyote was. Mm-hmm. But back then, you would pay somebody, $5,000. They would smuggle you across the border, and then you would go work in the fields or go, find a labor-intensive job and provide for your family. It's not like that anymore. The cartels have taken control over everything that goes in and out of that border. So, including including anyone that wants to live here. So you don't know who's here to cause harm and who's coming here to live a better life. And since the cartels do control everything that happens in the border, it's no longer $5,000, and I'm estimating numbers to give you an idea, but it's no longer, hey, here's $5,000, get me over there. Now it's here's $20,000 to the cartel, and they are treated inhumanely. And by the way, here's this kilo of cocaine, and by the way, you don't have an option, otherwise we chop your head off. And 80% of the women that come through that border are taken advantage of. I remember hearing a story not too long ago that of a 12-year-old girl that was found with semen from 12 different men inside of her. No one ever speaks about that. They speak about separation at the border as they paint the narrative as a way to say that President Trump has separated families. What they don't tell you is that most kids are kidnapped by the cartels and used to traffic, used for human trafficking back and forth, knowing that their likelihood of getting across, giving the impression that they're a family unit, is going to go up. So you look at the actual damage that's taking place at the border, and you look at the narrative that's being painted by the Democrats saying that, oh, you guys are obviously racist and they hate minorities and all this stuff. You're seeing the manipulation from one side, and many Hispanics right now are actually starting to pay attention because there's such a heavy effort to keep information away from them that they understand how it works at the border. Most people, most Democrats, as you can see from the Twitter storms after the president mentioned coyotes, they do not understand. And so people are starting to pay attention at the fact that even if they do or they don't agree with this president, they could see that only one side is shielding them from the actual truth, and more people are starting to wake up. An example of that is, and I got the Democrat Party got really upset with me over this one, but I had a little bit of fun with it. We had in 1 week, and I live in the Milwaukee area, so in 1 week we had 2 Hispanic-oriented events. One for President Trump, and then the Biden campaign had their event. And I posted a picture of each one. We had about 100 people at our event on the South Side, which is where most of the Hispanics live. If you ever want some good tacos, go to the South Side of Milwaukee. And we had about 100 people there. Eric Trump showed up, so Eric Trump was the only white person. And then you look at the ones that the Biden team had, and you had members of Congress, you had the mayor, you had every Democrat, elected official, and about 5 attendees. So I showed the contrast, just showing where the enthusiasm was on with what campaigns are actually activating their bases, and ours was by contrast way larger than theirs. So they got really upset with me, and then they told me I was spreading COVID, but none of us got COVID, which is good. That was just their way of making an excuse for not being able to gather support for a candidate that has predominantly supported policies that have negatively affected the Hispanic community.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because I have noticed, and you probably have too, that like the Democratic Party, the media has an agenda, and they only show you what they want to show you. And I think that you just spoke to that in this contrast of who has shown up for these debates, for these rallies, for things like that. Do you find that the narrative that the media is offering to the American people, do you find that it's consistent with Hispanic values, what they're saying about Hispanic voters? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it doesn't, and I'll give you an example. We had I remember there was a reporter that was running around, the South Side of Milwaukee, and he was trying to get a pulse of the way that Hispanics voted. And so I was watching him. He was going from business to business. Most people were like, well, we don't want to really talk to you. And I waited for his report to come out, and he said that out of I think he spoke to like 50 people, and he said nearly a third of them were Trump supporters, but not just voting for Trump. They were enthusiastically voting for Trump. That was a small segment of the article, and the rest of it was just talking about all the things that the Democrats need to do in order to win the Hispanic vote, because included in that was was that the responses from the Democrats or from Hispanics were that the Democrats have never really given the Hispanic community a platform, or at least at least for this election cycle. And a lot of them were frustrated. So you see the things that actually made us look good were kind of hidden in the back, and the rest of it's just talked about. Hispanics in Milwaukee are they're competitive in this election cycle. So another example, and this was probably my favorite one, was during the RNC convention, Vice President Mike Pence. They had to switch everything to virtual convention because of COVID, and they did their acceptance of the nominee in person. And Vice President Mike Pence wanted, since you weren't allowed to have many people in the room, he wanted it to be outdoors, and he wanted it to be with all veterans. And so I was fortunate enough to attend his acceptance speech out in Baltimore, and it was an amazing event. There were I've never met a Purple Heart, I've never met a Medal of Honor recipient, and I'm sitting on the golf cart on the way to the event. I'm sitting next to four, so I thought that was cool. It was just an amazing event. The vice president was accepting his nomination to one of the highest offices in the land. That should have been the headline. That should have been what the story was about. Right before or right after his speech, President Trump, in true Trump fashion, lands on Marine One, walks onto the stage with the First Lady. So now you've got the Vice President, the President, the First and Second Lady, and Tracy Atkins, that walks out on stage. Tracy Atkins sings the national anthem. The president, waves at the crowd, for kind of talks to us from 10 feet away for about 10 minutes, and then he jumps back on his helicopter and leaves. Well, I thought that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I then look at about 20 reporters that are in their dresses, they're in their suits, and they're all sitting in the dirt comparing pictures. Did you see him get too close to somebody? Did he give anyone knuckles? Did he shake any hands? And that's the only thing that mattered to them, was being able to show their own personal narrative, which was, the president is spreading COVID. Mm-hmm. Nothing mattered about the nomination to them. Nothing mattered about the event. Nothing mattered about the cool helicopter that lands in the middle of this event. Tracy Atkins comes out, sings to everybody, and they leave. Awesome event. None of that mattered. All that mattered to them was, how can we get them? That was one of the first instances where I've actually seen like how much they go out of their way to paint the story that they want rather than the story that exists.
Values, how he was really a representation of what the American people are all about this this great American dream. And so I appreciate you just bringing that up, because I do think that it matters what the American people are saying. The minority groups, what matters to you, that matters to me as I go to the polls, and that should matter to every American as they go to the polls. And so we've seen that it matters to President Trump, and I appreciate that greatly. I want to shift gears here a little bit. As you know, I am an abortion survivor. Abortion is kind of my issue, although I love that we got to highlight some of the other things that are mattering to Hispanics as they head to the polls. But I'm curious, what are Hispanic voters saying about abortion in this upcoming election? Does it matter? Why does it matter? Which candidate is representing the values of people like you as it pertains to the abortion debate?
So abortion is actually one of the key issues that will get somebody to switch from a Democrat to a Republican. The reason I say that is because I mentioned at the beginning of this segment that most Hispanics believe, in family values, we're people of faith, we're people that are hardworking. But if you can convince them that they are victims, then you own them. So the topic of abortion, most Hispanics are people of faith, and so when you explain to them the differences between the different parties and who's advocating for what, almost every single time when you explain to them the difference between the parties when describing abortion, that is the first indication that where they start realizing that they've had it wrong, because they've always, I've had people tell me like, oh yeah, they believe in they believe in life and Trump doesn't. I'm like, but I think you've got it the other way. And then I'll start showing them examples. And in the Hispanic and African American community, nearly all Planned Parenthoods are in minority business or minority communities. I start telling them how when Planned Parenthood was first created, it's a part of its goal was to eradicate minorities. And I will show them quotes from Margaret Sanger. I will show them statistics behind their placement of locations in our communities. And and I've mentioned to them, if for the most part, if abortion was illegal, minorities would have a bigger presence in this country. But they've been able to suppress our voice by getting rid of us before we even have a chance. And the second that people start realizing who the candidates are or where the candidates stand as far as their faith and their positions on abortion, they start swinging heavily in the other direction. Because I've never met a Hispanic that has ever told me that my position on abortion is to kill all babies, or anyone should be able to kill whoever they want before they're born.
That's interesting, because the conversation that I'm hearing, especially from the media, from the left, is that minorities like Hispanics, they need abortion. That's what we're being fed. And so it's interesting that you bring that up, because you're saying, in fact, that Hispanics are people of faith, predominantly Catholic, I would assume, at least Mexico is predominantly Catholic, and I lived there a couple years when I was a kid, and so I appreciate that culture. I know how much faith plays into that for Hispanic people that value their family, that value their children. I see that very strongly in the Hispanic community. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because I'm finding that the narrative that I'm being told as an American, from the TV, from these news stations, from the political parties, is maybe not quite in line with what you're saying the American people that you're talking to, in line with their beliefs and their belief system that they will take to the polls.
Well, what you just said right now is that the narrative that you hear is that Hispanics need abortion, but it's never do they want abortion. Mm-hmm. The argument I always hear when it comes to abortion, and it's always by white liberals, it's never by other Hispanics, is that like, oh well, what if they can't afford these communities? They typically can't afford to have a child. What they're saying is like, well, if you're a poor person of color, you don't matter, but we're good. We can afford, like, we're an upper class. We're able to afford it. We're good. You guys kill each other off, and that's okay. Um, it's never, they're never going to say that, that they agree in abortion because it's convenient to them. Their argument always falls on, you guys really shouldn't be having kids.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having this conversation with me. I know that it could be an uncomfortable conversation as we bring just different topics like race right now is such a touchy thing. But I appreciate you just voicing the opinion, the belief system of the Hispanic community, because I really do care, and I believe that the American people care and want to take that into consideration. As people head to the polls, this is the last week. We have just a few days. What would be something that you want to say to the American people in general as they go vote their values? What matters? What's your final thought?
So my final thoughts is, if abortion is something that's important to you, if anything that I mentioned today, is a part of your value system when you vote, try to do whatever you can to make sure that, that voting is the minimum that you do. There are many faith groups out there that are actually, participating in this election and helping this president to get elected. And if there isn't one local to you, then there's usually a local county Republican Party that's willing to help. And my suggestion to people would be to ask, to give them a call and say, hey, how can I canvass my own neighborhood? The president can't do this by himself, but as individuals, if I go around and I knock on the door of every one of my neighbors that I know votes with the same values that I have, then making sure that they get to the polls is the best way that you as an individual can help. And most county parties, they have all that information. So instead of knocking on all of your neighbors and you notice, hey, these 10 neighbors of mine, they don't always get out and vote, but they vote with the same values that I have. You could go out. The party or some faith groups will give you that information, and you can knock on their door and say, "Hey, will you come out and vote with me?" And that's probably the best thing that people can do right now.
That's such a great encouragement. I, like you, I know, consider it such a privilege to be able to use my voice as an American and vote my beliefs. And so, yes, I want to echo that. Get out and vote. Get out and talk to your neighbors, your community. Encourage them to vote. Encourage them to take their values to the polls, to educate themselves before they get to the polls, and listens to stories of people like Mario who are making a difference, who know what they believe, who are fighting for what they believe. I think it's so important. No matter your demographic, no matter where you live, where you're from, what you believe, get out and vote. So thank you for joining us, Mario. It's a privilege to be able to talk with you. Thank you again for your service. It's because of people like you that we get to live this great American dream. So thank you.
Thank you.